points in the document library for Alfresco version 4. These are the things we're going to be covering. Oh, can we... Thank you. Good. So we had some goals. I made some promises at last year's DevCon to make customization a little easier. And so I'll just go through some of the background on that. And then we'll go through what's been refactored and how you go about extending some of the more common areas of the document library. So in headline terms, what were the Swift goals? Well, we want to give people like you, developers, partners, and implementers, the ability to customize and extend the shared document library without having to duplicate large amounts of code. This is one of the biggest complaints is perhaps a bit strong, but we were mindful of it, that people don't want to copy-paste code from the Alfresco, the share war, in order to make simple extensions. And it makes sense, and it's something that we wanted to fix. But it also allows modules such as the Web Quick Start and records management to be fully isolated from core share, so that we haven't got special case code for modules, which means writing your own modules can use the same extension points, and you don't have to start inserting hooks in the middle of share. So this is what 3.4 looked like. These were the unofficial extension points. This is what you had to do in order to get your custom actions, indicators, filters, everything else into the share UI. And it was not ideal. There were modifications had to be made to the client, the web tier, and often the repository. So what we've done for 4.0 is there are certain defined extension points. And this is something that we're going to be iterating over time. So version 4 is the first version of this new extension. And the next talk by my colleague David Draper will be talking about how you extend share components and start replacing components. But this is specifically about customizations within the document library components themselves. So we took, looking at the repository tier, we've now returned all node properties and aspects. Before it was just a subset that we needed to render the share UI. Now we just bring everything back. And we've also allowed the ability to add custom property decorators. So you're not just getting the raw properties. The classic example in share is when we display username, what we actually want to display is first name and a last name with a link to the profile page. So we've got an idea of property decorators, and I'll cover that a little later. On the web tier, definitions now appear once in share config. So there's no longer, you don't have to copy and paste WebScript config XML files into some nested folder in web extensions. It's all in a config file. And this is true for status indicators, metadata templates, and actions. So 4.0 looks a little bit more like this. Now, it actually looks more complicated, but it's not. Often you won't even need to do client-side customizations, which I think will be a relief to a lot of people. There are specific situations where you have to do that, for example, gathering user data. But on the whole, most modifications will be now made on the web tier and or the repository. So let's just have a look at what's changed in terms of detail. So have a look at the repository first. I've been mindful that we don't want to break customizations that people have already got. Having said that, there are certain things that will not work on v4 that you've done for 3.4, which was a hard decision, but we had to make it in order to push forward on share and make it easier in the long term. So there will be a little bit of a hill to climb, migrating customizations, but once that's done, it'll be a lot easier moving forward. So there's a new set of document library web scripts on the repository tier, imaginatively titled v2. There's still an evaluator, lib.js, but it's much, much smaller, and it just handles links and working copies, things that are very difficult to actually put into config. Filters is work in progress. There's still a filters.js, but the path queries no longer use Lucene. They're using canned queries straight to the database. They're much faster, better paging. And most of the work is done via a couple of Java classes. There's now application script utils and a custom response. And I'll be talking a little bit more about those now. So the application script utils bean is the one, you throw it a node and it turns it into JSON, is its headline job. Now, it also manages decorating properties that we can use in Share. So here's an example of the CMCreator, where normally you just get back a username, and we actually want first name, last name, display name. So there's a simple bit of configuration that, again, you can add to. And this one's called, there's a username property decorator, so it knows whenever it comes across a username, go and look up that user. You're in the repository already. Just pull back the first name, last name, display name, and it turns that string, the CMCreator, which was a username string, turns it into a JSON object that we can then use on the Share tier. Slingshot.lib custom response bean manages things that are common to all nodes. So it's things like whether modules are installed or not. And the one we're interested in out of the box is the SharePoint connector, the VTI server. And it's used for the online edit action. So very simply, just, again, all via configuration, there's a bean sprung in, and it just goes to look to see if the module's enabled, and if so, returns some properties that Share needs in order to build the URL to the SharePoint protocol, or null if the module's not installed. Now you can add to this, and again, it's all via Spring config. You can just add, if you need to know whether something is switched on or off in the repository, or you need to bring back some metadata, this is the place to do it. The other headline, the big headline to take away from v4 is that everything is now evaluated on the web tier. Previously, there was an awful lot of code on the client to do with evaluating permissions, what actions were available. That's all now done on the web tier via Java evaluators. So looking at how that's configured, something like this Google Docs locked indicator, you can see there's an evaluator that just goes and looks at the properties. Remember, all the properties are returned, so we can just look to see if certain key properties are there. And we've got some parameterized labels that we like to display on the action. On the indicator. So we've got evaluators, label parameters, and we can override other indicators, because certain indicators, this document, if it's checked out to Google Docs, will be locked. And rather than spamming the user with lots of different indicators that don't mean anything, we just want to display the one that says, you've got it checked out to Google. Metadata templates. Another request we had was, I'm thinking about the browse view on the document library. So this isn't the details view that's all driven by forms and already has this functionality. This is specifically the browse view, where there's the panel in the center typically had title, description, tags. Very difficult to extend. You had to get into the YUI data table configuration, inject your own, and copy about 17 pages of JavaScript code into your own. All done via configuration now. A little bit of flexibility perhaps has been lost, but there is you can either display the raw property with or without a label, or you can actually add your own JavaScript renderer, and I'll show you that that's much easier than it used to be. So there's a couple of examples out of the box, a couple of templates out of the box. There's the default, and you can see even the default one, we've got an evaluator, whether to display categories or not. So previously, you didn't have categories when browsing a document in a site library, but now if it's got that classifiable aspect, this evaluator kicks in, and you get the categories displayed. The working copy evaluator on the meta, what happens is that you should never add an evaluator to the default. It's undefined. I have no idea what will happen. Feel free to try it, but all bets are off. All the other templates need an evaluator, and the first one that returns true is the one that's displayed. So if the working copy template, we're looking at certain properties that come back from the node, and we display a much simpler detailed area. It just says when it was checked out and a description. So here's an example of a custom metadata config, and this will be the basis of my demo a little later. So the business case is we've got lots of photos and we want to display. We now, via the Tika metadata extractors, we now pull back all the EXIF and geographic metadata and everything else that might be on a photo. So it would be nice to display that in the document library browse view when that situation occurs. So we've got to just simply add a new evaluator, and I'll show you the code that is behind that. And then we're showing the date and the size, and if we've got the exposure information, we're going to use a custom JavaScript renderer to just render out, pull back the exposure, the aperture, information that's useful to display when you're dealing with photos in the document library. And the other thing you can do is decide whether your custom metadata appears in both simple or detailed view, just via a simple attribute. So finally, on metadata templates, you can use very simple placeholders. So they can be node property names, including custom models, or you can use your JavaScript renderer. And there's perhaps it's a bit strong to call it an API, but there's a well-known entry point, how you register your JavaScript renderer. And it's just via you fire an event which registers some JavaScript with the document library so that whenever a node comes along that has that metadata template, your JavaScript gets run and you just return HTML that's put out on the page. Moving on to actions, perhaps the most important thing that people want to add to and extend, and also remove actions. The config for actions has changed completely. It's no longer relates at all to what's in 3.4. It's more based, if you're familiar with the Explorer client, it's a bit more based on that structure, where all the actions are defined in blocks, and then action groups determine which actions are used in certain situations, and it's more view-based rather than state-based that 3.4 was. And of course, they're now configured once. So if you want to change or add a new action, you do it once. You no longer have to do it on the details page, the browse page, the folder details page. It's all just once. And this is what it looks like. So I've pulled out the edit online example. And it's very simple. You're saying it's a JavaScript action. Here's its label. And somewhere in the document library that someone has defined a JavaScript function called onActionEditOnline. The user needs the right permissions, and there's an evaluator, which just looks at certain key properties, and this one particularly looks at whether that SharePoint module is installed. So the evaluators get hold of, are given all the metadata they need to make these decisions. So there are three main action types. Links, which go to external web sources or content. Page links, which go to another share page. And the reason they're different is because we need to know whether we're in a site context or not. So there's just a little bit of logic that we need there. And we also handle when running in, say, Liferay as a portlet. And the classic one is the JavaScript action. The other thing we've done is we've added two out-of-the-box template actions, if you like. So there's a simple repo action, and we use this for approve and reject. And it just means if you've written a repository action via config, it's very, very simple to wire that up in Share and add it as an action onto a node. The other one we've added is a form dialog action. So an example here is we can do transform to image, and it's all configured via forms config. They're not switched on out of the box because they're considered advanced, but it's just a matter of overriding the config to enable them. And we can, the forms service now supports actions and gathering metadata properties or parameters that action might need, and that's done automatically. So as I said, sometimes client-side code is required, for example, user input. So you just register a custom action handler. So rather than having to know the ins and outs of YUI and JavaScript and adding to prototypes and everything else, again, it's very simple. You just fire this event, passing in your custom JavaScript code. So the action config will then look for, say, this new action on action Geotag, and it knows what to do with it. So I mentioned that the config has changed, and it's a little bit more like Explorer. So there's a big section of available actions, and we then group those. And within that group, we can assign an order, and we can override certain properties like the label. So we can reuse. So if we've got a delete action, we want to display, when dealing with a document, we like to display delete document to the user, but when dealing with a folder, we can do delete folder. But it's exactly the same action. We're just overriding the label. So it's much easier to just define something once and override where necessary. So these are the out-of-the-box action groups. You can see they're view-based, so there's the browse view, details view for documents and folders. And then we've got special handling for links, just because they're a little bit different in how Share has to deal with them for doing linking across sites. But that should be it. So rather than define the action in 4 places, define it once and then just decide which view you want that action to appear in. And the group name is calculated by a function on the web tier, calculate action group ID. Currently, it just looks at, it's given the view that you're on, and it looks at the node and decides whether you're a document or a folder. When we release the records management for v4, we'll override this to do some new action groups for the record management folders, rather than trying to mix in the records management actions with the existing groups, because it just gets too messy in terms of evaluators. So we just swap in a whole new set of action groups for that situation. So here's a couple of examples. Let's say you want to completely disable an action. It's as simple as this. There's an out-of-the-box evaluator called disable action. It's literally 3 lines of Java that just return false. And you just configure it into the, as an extension to an action. So here's an example of we've decided no one is allowed to upload a new version. So it's just simply removed from the UI completely. As far as the share is concerned, that action doesn't exist. And there's an example for the Web Quick Start site, where we actually want to remove the publish action, because the Web Quick Start is provides a similar function, so you end up with 2 actions. So there's a different type of evaluator, and you can see there's another attribute on the evaluator to negate it. Often it's easier to add in one evaluator to an action and negate the logic, rather than have to add evaluators to every other action, just so you can specialize the one case. So these are the evaluators that are available out of the box. I won't read them all, but these cover all the existing share actions. And they're all configurable. Underneath, they're simply Java code that's walking through the JSON returned by the server. And what we've done is we've defined them in such a way that they're parameterized via Spring config. So if you want to check for an aspect, you can just reuse the has aspect evaluator, pass in a list of aspects that must be present in order for that action to appear. We also have chaining of evaluators, so you can say all of these evaluators must pass. You can say any of these evaluators must pass, and you can negate them, group them, all sorts of abilities. So taking a look at the client-side extensions, because this was one of the pain points in 3.4. We've also got areas now where you can add your own JavaScript and CSS. Similar, we're using this dependencies tag, both in the share configuration forms config and now in the document library as well. And your JavaScript will be added at the bottom of the page so you know that all the existing components are there. So if you know what you're doing, you can go and get those components and change their behavior. If that's the way you want to work, then that's fine, and this is how you can achieve that. So just a reminder that these are the client-side extension points now. For a custom renderer, you've got register renderer, and a custom action is register action. So I think that's enough PowerPoint slides. I'll show you what we've got. So here's share, and you can just see this custom theme. Let me remove the welcome dashboard. And in this document library, I've got some photos that I've uploaded previously that I've got EXIF information, and some of them have got geographic information. But this is what I was saying before, is that it would be nice. I know that those have got EXIF information, and if I go to the details page, I can actually see that the form service returns exposure time and aperture, ISO speed, things like that. Stuff that would be useful to see on the browse page without having to go into the details view. So how can we do that? Just arrange for the resolution here. Sorry, bear with me a second. So what I've got is, very simply, I'm going to show you how you can register a custom renderer for this EXIF information. So I've got a custom context file that's just bringing in some new messages. And here's an evaluator. And it's one of the, customizing one of the out-of-the-box ones, property not null. And I'm just looking for this custom property EXIF exposure time. So if that property comes back and it's not null, my evaluator is going to return true. I've also got a has EXIF, which uses the has aspect, and you can see I'm just looking for the EXIF aspect that contains all those EXIF properties. So how do I use those evaluators? Well, here's share config custom, and you can see I'm going to bring in a new client-side dependency, exif.js, and that's going to get loaded automatically by the document library each time. We have to bring in the JavaScript on page load just in case we're going to need it. It's better to have the performance hit on page load rather than trying to determine what JavaScript you need when the metadata renderer comes up for the first time or the action gets used for the first time. The browser will cache this, and it's a better way of working. So I'm defining a new metadata template, and it's the one that showed in the presentation. And you can see here's where I use the evaluator, has EXIF. So we're going to use this template if a photo has the EXIF aspect. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm only going to display the exposure line if my has exposure evaluator also returns true. So you can see here how I can mix two evaluators. This might not be the best business case in the world, but it's just seeing how you can use two custom evaluators to determine not only which metadata template to display, but also different lines within that template, depending on what properties are actually available, or whatever else you can come up with that you can use in an evaluator. And within that tag, I'm defining a custom renderer called exposure. And also by convention, I've got exif.label exposure. So the document library is going to render that label before the renderer, before the custom renderer. And you can see I'm also deciding to display, I've got indexes so I can move that line around, and I've got the standard date, size, description, and the social tags along the bottom. I could choose to get rid of those if I wanted to. So just having a quick look at what's involved in the JavaScript. Very simply just checking, is just check to see if we've got the document list component, and we're going to fire the register renderer event, say that we're handling the exposure line, and this is what we're going to do. So we're just looking through all the properties that come back. There's a new client-side helper object called JS Node. There's some documentation on the wiki. If you're familiar with our blogs, I've written a blog post on this, and I'll be adding more over time. There's a reference on the wiki to what this new client-side helper object, JS Node, does for you. It takes a lot of the work out of rendering properties. It's got help with functions like hasAspect, things that you might need in your custom renderer. And you can see we're very simply pulling out exposure time property, working out a fraction, and just putting it all in one big message that we're going to return the HTML. It has to be safe HTML that you return. We know here that those numbers, they're unlikely to contain script. Really, I should be HTML encoding this string before outputting it. If someone does manage to get a aperture of script delete document, then you could run into problems. So the contract is you return browser-safe HTML. So let's see that in action. What I'm going to do is I've got it deployed as a jar file, so I can very simply copy it to the extensions folder, and I just need to bounce my share application to pick up that Java file, which shouldn't take long. You'll notice as developers, we run the repository and share as separate Tomcat servers. It's for a couple of reasons. As far as I'm concerned, the most important one is it only takes 12.5 seconds to restart, because I'm working mostly in share application. The other point is it makes sure that there's complete separation between share running on a different port to the repository. But it's definitely useful to do. If you're doing a lot of share development, I recommend it. So we'll refresh that page, and I'll just have to log in again. And you can see now on the photos, there's my custom renderer that's just picked up the EXIF information buried in those folders that's been pulled back. And it's as simple as that. Previously, that would have been hundreds of lines of JavaScript that you had to copy and paste and maintain as we moved from version to version. But that was it. That was a couple of dozen lines of JavaScript and some config. So the other thing I can demo for you is a custom action. And for this, what we're going to do is take advantage of the geotagging that we now have. So I'm going to add some, as before, add some client-side assets, just some a CSS file and some JavaScript. And what I've got two actions that I'm defining: create geotag and update geotag. And very simply, just hooking into the same JavaScript action, but just different labels depending on whether that aspect is already present or not. So whether the property is already present or not. No, it's an aspect. So I've got a Google Maps, and you can see this one has got the negate equals true for when that aspect doesn't appear, and the one below you get the update action if it already has the aspect. So I've defined those actions. I can then decide where I want those actions to appear. So here I've decided I'm having them on the document browse page and the document details page. Arbitrary indexes, they're just going to appear at the end of the list. You could put those wherever you like and find a reference to the actions themselves. In terms of the JavaScript for the action, most of this code is just dealing with the Google map. There's no longer huge swathes of code, again, that you have to copy and paste from the share war in order to get your action in. So it's very simply, this top bit is just some hoop jumping for the Google Maps API. It's just life, I'm afraid. So once the Google API is loaded, you can see we're just calling the register action function and saying, I'm providing a function on the client called onActionGeotag. And here it is. And most of it is, like I say, is jumping through hoops for the Google Maps API. And all we're going to do is pull up a simple dialogue. And I won't give the game away too much. I'll just show you because it's much more interesting than actually wading through code. So again, I'm just going to, this is one I built earlier. So I'm just going to bounce the share application again. Just talk amongst yourself for 16.5 seconds. And a half, yeah. So here we go. So here, this top picture, you can see from the indicator, has already got the geographic aspect. So I'm expecting on there, and there we go, we get the update geotag option. So I click that, and nothing happens, of course. Thank you, demo gods. No. Is that a network problem? Yes. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Fingers crossed. Good. Okay. Apologies for the resolution issues. But so there we go. You can see. Actually, I shouldn't have done that. You can all see where I live. But so it's just pulled out the latitude and longitude from the EXIF metadata, and here's a Google map. So we can decide, well, actually, I don't want you to know where I live, so I'm going to move the dot up there. And then simply update that. This picture here, we can see, doesn't have geotagging data, so we get the other form of the action. Come on, Wi-Fi. We zoomed out to the moon or something. We're probably somewhere near Africa, aren't we? Okay. Let's put it. No, it's not going to let me do it. Come on, Google. Let's try that again. It was always going to be a bit hopeful with 200 people accessing the same Wi-Fi. No, well, if that's the worst thing that happened today, then that's, yeah, we're not happy. Okay, so I could have geotagged that on a normal internet connection. I could have added a geotag to that item, and that would have been that. So that concludes my presentation. Hopefully, that's given you some hope. Let me just, sorry, it doesn't quite conclude my presentation. Summary, all indicator metadata template and action config is centralized, extendable, completely refactored the web tier actions config. Like I say, it's not backward compatible with 3.4, but it's better for you in the long run. And the remote API doclist data web scripts are still there if you use them. I'll open it up to you. Do you have any questions? Is that Jeff?
Yeah.
Hi, Jeff.
So on the metadata templates, does it have to be just markup, or should I have a more elaborate representation of metadata? Like if I want to have an interactive widget there, I could be firing my own events or be as complex as I want to make it, right? It doesn't have to be that exact.
Sure, yeah. So the question was, how complex can the metadata templates be? I guess as complex as you like. It would be interesting to know how complex you can get. In theory, if you can, you're returning a block of HTML that's returned in this panel. So if you want to put custom sliders, drop-downs, data tables, I don't see why that wouldn't work at all. It's, as far as the browser concerned, it's just some HTML being loaded dynamically, and you can run custom JavaScript with that. It's a little bright. You'll have to shout out if I don't see you.
First of that, if you just want to put out the metadata value, then there's no coding at all for that. And I think, Mike, you did say that in the presentation.
That's right, yeah. If it's just a custom property value that can be displayed direct from the repository, it's config only. There's no JavaScript whatsoever.
So only if you want to decorate it, you need to use any code.
Yep. Okay. I guess that's it. Oh, sorry, one more. So the question was if there's two or more metadata templates. You mean if an evaluator might? It's the order that the code comes across them, so it's probably determined by Spring config, and the order that the config is read. The first one that it comes to that returns true, it will say, okay, we're using that one. There isn't any kind of indexing on that, so you'd have to have a more specialized evaluator in that case. Okay, I'm here, obviously, all day tomorrow, as well as later on, so if you do have any specific questions, then feel free to find me. Thank you very much for your attention.